One evening in the spring of 2014, I was walking down a small side street in central Hanoi when, on a stall by the side of the road, I saw an apple. It was freakishly large and red and inviting, and I'm terrible at haggling, so I paid $3 for this single piece of fruit and carried it into my room in the very charming Hanoi hotel. Like any good foreigner who's read his health warnings, I washed the apple diligently with bottled water, but when I bit into it, I felt this bitter chemical taste fill my mouth. It was the flavour I imagined back when I was a kid that all food was going to have after a nuclear war. I knew I should stop, but I was too tired to go out for any other food, so I ate half of it and then I just set it aside, repelled. 2 hours later, the stomach pains began. For 2 days, I sat in my room as it began to spin around me faster and faster, but I wasn't worried. I'd been through food poisoning before. I knew the script. You just have to drink water and let it pass through you. On the third day, I realised my time in Vietnam was just slipping away in this sickness blur. I was there to track down some survivors of the war for another book project I'm working on, so I called my translator, Dang Huan Lin, and told him we should drive deep into the countryside in the south as we'd planned all along. As we travelled around, a trashed hamlet here and an Agent Orange victim there, I was starting to feel steadier on my feet. The next morning, he took me to the hut of a tiny 87-year-old woman. Her lips were dyed bright red from the herbs she was chewing, and she pulled herself toward me across the floor on a wooden plank that somebody had managed to attach some wheels to. Throughout the war, she explained, she'd spent 9 years wandering from bomb to bomb trying to keep her kids alive. They were the only survivors from her village. As she was speaking, I started to experience something strange. Her voice seemed to be coming from very far away, and the room appeared to be moving around me uncontrollably. Then, quite unexpectedly, I started to explode, all over her hut, like a bomb of vomit and feces. When, some time later, I became aware of my surroundings again, the old woman was looking at me with what seemed to be sad eyes. "This boy needs to go to a hospital," she said. "He is very sick." No, I insisted. I'd lived in East London on a staple diet of fried chicken for years, so this was not my first time at the E. coli rodeo. I told Dang to drive me back to Hanoi so I could recover in my hotel room in front of CNN and the contents of my own stomach for a few more days. "No," the old woman said firmly. "The hospital." "Look, Johann," Dang said to me, "this is the only person with her kids who survived 9 years of American bombs in her village. I'm going to listen to her health advice over yours." He dragged me into his car, and I heaved and convulsed all the way to a sparse building that I learned later had been built by the Soviets decades before. I was the first foreigner to ever be treated there. From inside, a group of nurses, half excited, half baffled, rushed to me and carried me to a table where they started immediately shouting. Dang was yelling back at the nurses, and they were shrieking now, in a language that had no words I could recognise. I noticed then that they had put something tight around my arm. I also noticed that in the corner there was a little girl with her nose in plaster, alone. She looked at me. I looked back. We were the only patients in the room. As soon as they got the results of my blood pressure, dangerously low, the nurse said as Dang translated, they started jabbing needles into me. Later, Dang told me that he had falsely said I was a very important person from the West, and that if I died there, it would be a source of shame for the people of Vietnam. This went on for 10 minutes as my arm got heavy with tubes and track marks. Then they started to shout questions at me about my symptoms through Dang. It was a seemingly endless list about the nature of my pain. As all this was unfolding, I felt strangely split. Part of me was consumed with nausea. Everything was spinning so fast, and I kept thinking, stop moving, stop moving, stop moving. But another part of me, below or beneath or beyond this, was conducting a quite rational little monologue. "Oh, you're close to death, felled by a poisoned apple. You're like Eve, or Snow White, or Alan Turing." Then I thought, is your last thought really going to be that pretentious? Then I thought, if eating half an apple did this to you, what do these chemicals do to the farmers who work in the fields with them day in, day out for years? That'd be a good story someday. Then I thought, you shouldn't be thinking like this if you're on the brink of death. You should be thinking of profound moments in your life. You should be having flashbacks. When have you been truly happy?